News. May problema ka ba sa asawa, kaibigan, katrabaho, boss o negosyo? Tanong mo, sagot nila attorney. Mag-PM lang ng inyong problema at sasagutin iyan live ng abogado ng bayan na sina attorney Nikki De Vega at attorney Carlo Nicolas. Libreng payo ng abogado mula kina attorney Nikki at attorney Carlo. Ang Buhay at Batas ay isang programa na nagsasanib ng samut-saring mukha ng buhay at iba't ibang aspekto ng batas. UGM, Ugnayang Gobyerno at Mamamayan, ang programang humuhugot sa mga isyung may kinalaman sa pang-araw-araw nating buhay at tumatalakay sa halo-halong usapin na may kabuluhan sa ating lahat.
Turo-Guro, turo-turong pangguro, sari-sari ang hain, napapanahong usapin, sagot sa suliranin, sama-samang hanapin, tuloy kayo.
Good evening, mga katriko.
Good evening.
Today is Monday, April 12. Sana po ay nasa mabuti kayong kalagayan habang nakikinig sa aming show today. Kung kayo ay naghahanda ng inyong hapunan or naghahapunan na, go ahead lang po. Sasamahan namin kayo in the next 30 minutes. Ako po si Isabel Martin from Ateneo de Manila University and this is Radyo Turo-Guro. Masarap ang usapan, hapunan ay karunungan.
Good evening po sa ating lahat. Good evening, Doc Marts. Ako naman po si Miss Devi Paes mula rin sa Ateneo de Manila University. Welcome back mga katribo. Special po ang episode natin tonight as we welcome one of our dearest colleagues and friends to our show. Walang iba kundi po si Dr. Rica Bolipata Santos from the Loyola School's English Department ng Ateneo. Maririnig po natin mamaya mula sa kanya kung bakit mahalaga pa rin ang pagturo at pagbabasa ng poetry. Naku, napaka-exciting po. Sa panahon ng pandemya, ano ang kahulugan ng poetry? So ano nga po ulit ang ating subject for today? Well, today is Monday and every Monday is English. Yes. So mga katribo, please feel free to comment on our show habang kayo ay nanunood sa Facebook Tribe today. Tribe stands for Teachers Redefining and Innovating for Better Education. Baka po may tanong kayo tungkol sa English language teaching na kaya naming sagutin ni Doc Marts in a future episode. O baka naman po nanonood kayo sa Facebook page ng DZRJ o kaya naman sa YouTube channel nila. So we would also like to invite you to let you know that Radyo Bandido is now on YouTube channel RJAM News. Yes, so please subscribe to RJAM News by clicking the notification button para naman lagi tayong uploaded sa mga
updated.
Kasi online ang ating buhay ngayon, kaya upload ang aking naisip para tayo laging updated sa mga breaking news o sa mga bagong uploaded videos. Nako, nagkagulo-gulo na. Thank you, Doc Marts, for the correction. So, bago po natin umpisahan ang ating discussion for our episode tonight, balikan po natin ang ating discussion last week.
Yes.
Nung nakaraang Monday po mga katribo, our topic was on effective strategies for teaching reading. Sa SKL, sa share ko lang portion ni Doc Marts, nakapag-review po tayo ng different approaches to teaching reading. And these are, number 1, the traditional view, number 2, the cognitive view, and number 3, the meta-cognitive view. Nag-focus po tayo sa third approach na meta-cognitive view with the help of our special guest na si Sir Jovi Espino, kung maaalala niyo po. Si Sir Jovi po shared the BHH framework. Yes, hindi po siya K-pop group. Ito po yung book, head, and heart,
Heart.
framework. Yes, in teaching reading na natutunan niya sa isang ASELT workshop. Naku, konting plugging lang po para malinaw po mga katribo. Ang ASELT stands po for Ateneo Center for English Language Teaching, and we provide various teacher training workshops. So hello po sa mga taga-ASELT. Good evening po sa inyong lahat. So in a workshop that Sir Jovi attended, he and his groupmates worked on a lesson design that applied the BHH framework. At lumitaw po sa aming discussion na sa BHH framework na ito, in-apply ang metacognitive approach as it facilitates students to think about what they are reading in an active and engaged manner that questions the text in relation to their experiences and observations of the world around them. Ito rin pong BHH framework ay angkop for many students' levels of reading, kahit po sa basic ed. So kung gusto niyo pong malaman kung ano po itong BHH framework, sana po balikan niyo ang episode na yon with Sir Jovi. So ayan po ang ating review, Doc Marts. Okay na ba yon?
Yes, very good.
So ready na po tayo for our next segment, mga katribo.
SKL. Share ko lang.
Thank you, Miss Debbie, for that review of last week's episode. Mga katribo, if you missed our previous episodes, madali lang po to catch up sa ating teacher training. All you have to do is go to Facebook or YouTube and key in Radyo Turo-Guro plus the date in the search bar. Sa YouTube po naman, mahahanap ninyo ang Radyo Turo-Guro sa RJAMU. So please don't forget to subscribe para po makaka-catch up kayo sa mga sessions natin. Kung meron kayong mga tanong about the English language or about teaching English that you'd like us to address, please just send us a message sa Tribe Today FB page po namin.
Yes.
Okay, so dear teachers, today we will talk about poetry.
Okay.
Alam naman natin lahat na hindi naman madaling ituro ang poetry sa ating mga students for many reasons. One being the perceived difficulty of the language. Kasi nga ang poetry ay talaga namang gumagamit ng tinatawag nating literary language. No?
Okay.
Pero dear teachers, hindi kailangan maging mahirap ang pagbabasa or pagtuturo ng poetry. In fact, sa ating MELCs po, no, yung most essential learning competencies for English, as early as grade 1, there is already an expectation for the children to recognize rhyming words in nursery rhymes, poems, and songs that they hear. So ang mga bata po ay expected to listen to and recite poems.
Yes.
Sa K-12 basic education curriculum naman, ang poetry ay nakalista alongside oral language and fluency. So, makikita natin ng mga katribo na poetry is really a resource we can tap sa ating language teaching. Today po, we learn more about poetry, not only as something we teach in the classroom, but also something that feeds our soul, di ba?
Yes.
O, share ko lang, Miss Debbie, isang article na nabasa ko nung araw pa, pero medyo 21st century na. Yung title nito ay Why Teaching Poetry is So Important. The often neglected literary form can help students learn in ways that prose can't. Medyo haba ng title na. No, but it's an opinion.
Title pa pala lang.
Yeah, parang tula na, no? Okay. Pero it's an opinion piece na from an American literature teacher. Hindi ko siya kilala, no? Pero very informative ang kanyang piece. I will just paraphrase two big ideas, which are yung unang-una, sabi niya, poetry seems to be suffering from an image problem. Kumbaga sa artista, may image problem siya.
Anong ibig sabihin?
Kasi yung mga movies like Dead Poets Society, for example, no, the poets and poetry are presented as yung mga mayayaman, mahatalino, yung parang sila lang ang may karapatan na tumula. Hindi naman totoo yun, no? We know that, no? Yung second big idea na sinulat niya sa kanyang article, sabi niya, education systems, they seem to de-emphasize creative expression in favor of expository writing. So halimbawa, yung mga teachers na given a choice between text to teach in a class, lalo na pag masikip na yung quarter, no? Usually, ang idadrop mo na yung literature.
Ay, nako.
Sayang naman ang benefits, diba, ng exposure to literature. So, today po mga katribo, we have a guest who will talk about poetry. So Miss Devi, baka kailangan natin tawagin ng ating guest?
Yes, thank you, Doc Marts, for your share ko lang on poetry. Marami na naman tayong pag-iisipan. And like we mentioned at the beginning of the program, we would like to welcome one of our dearest colleagues from the Loyola School's English Department. Walang iba kundi si Dr. Rica Bolipata Santos. Welcome, Doc Rica.
Welcome, Doc Rica.
Yes, there she is. Good evening.
Hello, everyone. Evening. Hello, friends.
Hello,
Yes, hello,
Magandang
friends.
gabi sa lahat, especially to your listeners.
Yes,
I'm
thank you
very
for joining us.
Yes, of course. Nagluto na ako ng mas maaga para ready ako for the show.
Wow, thank you naman.
Salamat
So,
naman.
I would like to begin, Dr. Rica, our conversation on poetry and the significance of poetry during these times. At you are one of those who are recognized with poetry and teaching poetry in the classroom. Ano ba ang ang gumagabay sa yung prinsipyo as a teacher of poetry?
Actually, maganda yung maganda yung simula ni Isabel, no, na hindi maganda ang PR ng poetry.
Yes.
Right? Ako naman si Miss PR of everything, di ba?
Ako, talaga.
I think it's iniisip ko kanina yung question na yan, di ba? At parang kasi yan I started teaching literature in 1991. Actually, one of my first
Laglagan talaga.
Then,
Laglagan ng mga date. Ano ba yan?
Laglagan ng edad.
No, because I also want to share, because I'm sure your teachers are also in different phases of their teaching career. And no matter how many seminars you go through or in-service seminars you go through, at the end of the day, you're really all alone to kind of figure it out, no? And I discovered teaching poetry, no, that there was so much fear. That the students were instinctively afraid of it. They were wary of it. And I grew up with poetry. I love poetry. My goal in life is to memorize poems when there's nothing to do, which is never ever. So I discovered, no, sa kakasuri ko siguro ng classroom ko, anong nag-work, anong hindi nag-work, that the students have a fear of it. They're hesitant of it, and they're afraid of it because it seems foreign to them. It seems like a strange place. And as you said, it's a place only for a kind of person, a kind of status, ganyan, no? So I think the underlying principle of my poetry class, no, is that poetry is ordinary, it's familiar, it's one of the oldest things in the world.
Yes.
And that when we began to speak, in the beginning was the word, and the very use of the word in itself is like poetry. Because every time you have an utterance or you say something, you create a metaphor for the phenomenon in front of you. So I'm very mindful of showing students how poetry is all around us. It's in commercials, in songs. It's in stuff when we say, I am heartbroken. Or I have a crush on someone, which are all poems in and of themselves, right? And that kind of awareness of the commonality of it or the commonness of it makes them less afraid of poetry. Poetry, like any other discipline, is kind of like a language system. Diba? So if you have mathematics and you have science, I guess this would be my second principle, no? And as a language system, it has its own domain, its own rules, right? And so when you teach poetry, in the way you teach math or science, you have to teach them about the operating system, the OS system of poetry. But what I find to be very beautiful about poetry, is it's a kind of discipline that takes you from wonder, a wonder, and the way the word wonder, the wonderment, or how wonderful, or how much do I wonder, and how can I wonder, wonder. Right? And that you can move from wonder to appreciation, even before you get to lesson or insight or what does it mean, di ba? Parang, ang ganda. Ang ganda ng tula. Ang ganda ng laro. Ang ganda ng paglalaro nung gumawa ng poem na to, di ba?
Yes.
And then there are poems which go beyond wonder and appreciation and get you into the level of knowledge and information. When poets talk about bird flight or talk about the solar system, talk about, inside poems are also things that any human being can really learn from, diba? In terms of, ano bang natutunan ko today Natutunan ko pala na pag lumipad ang mga ibon ganito, or ganito pala ang Death Star.
Yes,
Cha-cha-cha-cha.
yes. Oo.
But the one thing poetry has, or even literature has, that perhaps other disciplines don't have, no, is feeling and emotion.
Sa bongga.
Yun yung mga,
Oo.
Lumalabas ang pagka-Julie
Tama.
Vega mo.
Yes. So,
di ba? Bawal
Lisa,
na naglalaglag ng
oo
age.
nga.
Di ba?
Sinabi
Si
Julie Vega.
other disciplines,
Hindi, so kapag...
baka hanggang knowledge and information lang sila, di ba? Pero ang poetry,
Oo.
may feeling and emotion, may affect, and the combination of wonderment, appreciation, information, feeling and emotion eventually brings you to wisdom.
Yes. So, meron akong
Nice.
question.
Yes. Nako, may phone-in question, pwede mag-call a friend. Okay,
Kasi
go.
nga, ang ganda ng pagkakwento mo tungkol sa tula, no? But how do we get our students to pay more attention to it? Kasi syempre nga, may
I know, right?
intimidating factor siya eh.
Oo.
Correct.
Yung sinasabi mong may domain.
Oo, parang afraid. Parang pang matalino lang yan, baka di ko kaya.
Parang nandito na ako sa I left the call. Second part,
Rika left the,
parang nagloloko na
left
yung
the
group.
group.
Alam mo, minsan talaga ano yan pagtataya.
Oh, I like that
Parang
word.
pagtataya. Commitment yan ng teacher. Kasi parang you will stop students from falling in love if your attitude is hindi nila makakayanan. I guess the other principle in my classroom, no, is really this great belief in our students na I always tell them, the greatest works of literature were written without spark notes.
Oo.
Right?
Yung mga kodigo.
Yeah.
Yung mga kodigo.
People watched Shakespeare and people watched Waiting for Godot and people watched all kinds of difficult things without the need for someone to tell them what it meant.
Yes.
And that when you mediate using a secondary source, you kind of like rob yourself of the chance to engage completely.
Right.
And part of it really, and I hope this really makes sense, a part of it is a comfortability with not knowing everything.
Yan.
A comfortability with, it's okay, na parang baby steps, diba? Today, natutunan ko to, pero merong sarado sa akin. Pero hindi lahat ng pintuan laging sarado. Diba? Hindi lahat ng pintuan laging nakabukas, So, a kind of acknowledgement that certain things require time and space and age and so on and so forth. So, in the lit classroom, it's almost like creating an ambiance where that's okay. Where it's okay to play, right? So in my class, we talk about words, how words are so interesting, like how does the word kind have anything to do with the word kin? That kin means to be of the same, of the same ilk. And so therefore kindness comes from being kin and kinship and kindred. The word computer only appears in 1970, but it's an older word, love or desire. But sometimes to just kind of like get students involved in meaning making in terms of an awareness of language and how language is so alive, it's not dead. And that kind of attitude really students really love because they're part of the meaning making and they're part of the delight. So to the questions of how do you do and how do we make
them
students mindful of that?
Yes.
One would really be a delight in the language. Diba? It's a little bit like falling in love again with any other discipline. Why do people want to become architects? They're in love with a line. Why do people want to become dancers? They're in love with a line. Why do people become engineers? They're also in love with a line. And in poetry, it's also the line. So how does the syntax and sentence construction kind of like and I guess the second part of that is an awareness of how, I guess this is where wonder comes in, na nakakamangha yung mundo. Ang daming kagandahan sa mundo. Diba?
Yes.
Parang minsan nakakalimutan natin yun na kasama yun. Pwede yun isama sa classroom. Minsan natatawa sila ng mamang exage mo, pero ang ganda talaga ng mundo. I mean, and my theory for that is wala namang ginawang pangit ng Diyos.
Oo naman.
So whether it's the way
Tatlo tayo ginawa ng Diyos.
Diba?
Ang ganda natin, diba? So,
diba? Tayo na lang
In fact, ito, usot when I was a high school teacher, diba, yung maglakad lang sa lansangan, di ba? Maglakad lang around campus, maghanap ng anong maganda sa campus, di ba? Tawang-tawa sila sa ganyan eh. But if you teach them the mindfulness to see, in the words of Buddha, a blade of grass, every blade of grass has someone whispering it to it, grow. So, yon. So I think the students come to class with a kind of openness and a kind of wonderment over the power of language to create the world through the word. And in the beginning, after all, was the word. And that sets them up for success. Because nakakaaliw din ang imagery.
Yes.
Nakakaaliw din ang the way poets come up with how things look from a different perspective.
Oo.
So, so parang,
may favorite poem ka di ba?
oh my gosh.
Pag gustong tulain.
Ay, ayan. Oo.
Baka meron kang gustong tulain today.
Masyado.
Hindi, meron namang excerpt.
Oo.
Hindi naman tayo ready.
Ito lagi kong ginagamit sa simula ng poetry classes ko. At mahaba siya, pero ganun din yun, di ba? Parang huwag matakot kung mahaba. At huwag matakot kung maikli.
Ito ba yon?
Nako, hindi tayo handa, ano?
Ito ba yun?
Ito ba ang favorite mo na tala?
Hindi tayo ready.
I have a crazy, crazy love of things. I like pliers and scissors. I love cups, rings, and bowls. Not to speak, of course, of hats. I love all things, not just the grandest, also the infinitely small. Thimbles, spurs, plates, and flower vases. Oh yes, the planet is sublime.
Wow.
And just in that expert, you'll see right away the repetition of S.
Yeah.
Ang ganda.
Pliers, scissors, cups, rings, bowls. And that delight in the sound and sense of
sound,
pleasurable. And I think Isabel was mentioning, no, na why do our first songs are nursery rhymes? Why is it the first thing we learn are in couplets? Diba? Because there's really pleasure in onomatopoeia. Diba? When we say,
How nice. So Doc Rica, the sense of wonder, that sense of openness and delight that you allow to
flourish.
Shape to flourish in the classroom, no? Tapos yung may binigay ka na example na palalakarin yung mga bata sa labas to be more attentive to the world outside, ganyan. Medyo nadurog yung puso ko doon kasi hindi yan pwede ngayon, di ba?
Maganda nga.
Medyo na heartbroken ako doon sa...
naman ako doon.
Not in the shared sense na sabay-sabay silang maglalakad as if we were in class again, di ba? So my next question would be, what is the significance of poetry during these pandemic times nga na hindi natin nagagawa yan, na may katuturan pa rin ba na magturo ng poetry sa panahon ngayon?
Sasagutin ko yan muna, no? Kung babalik tayo dun kay Pablo Neruda, no?
Okay.
Things, diba? Pag ini-exercise ko yan sa klase, sobrang saya ng mga estudyante. Pinapalista ko sa kanila yung mga common things nila. And common things don't have to be in a garden or in a school, no? The commonest things are the things in your room.
Oo nga, no? Pliers.
So, parang, and because if you'll notice from students or even for ourselves, there are things we keep in our room. Most of the things we keep in our rooms are the things that are most precious to us, right? And that when you start to list the common things, it turns out they're not so uncommon.
Right.
And that whether they're common or uncommon, that's also language play, because who gives meaning to what is common or not common is the I or the persona. So we don't always have the same list of things, no? To answer Devi's question, no one ever wonders if, sorry, we can get out of the slide. Sorry, Isabel.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Okay.
No one ever wonders if mathematics is relevant during a pandemic. Or if science is relevant during a pandemic.
Yeah.
Right? I think poetry has been a companion to humanity all throughout history.
Right.
And art and literature. In fact, I mean, it's kind of painful, no? But the greatest art sometimes comes from the most difficult periods, because the human need to make sense of so much chaos is intrinsic to us as creators.
Right.
It is actually our closest link to God, diba? To be able to co-create, right? If you remember, during the American president's inauguration, Amanda Gorman recited the poem and created such, right? Because her poem resonated so much because it articulated history the anxiety of the times, but it also spoke of hope and love. And I think during these difficult times in the classroom, poetry is a great place to rest and ruminate.
Oh, maganda
It
yan.
will allow your
Poetry is a great place to rest and ruminate.
That
Ang
in itself is a
ganda.
poetic line.
Isa pa po magandang line kasi
Okay.
dismiss na ako eh.
Eh kasi ang ganda. Kailangan nating bagalan.
Kasi hindi mo naalala yung mga line mo, hindi ko tuloy masulat.
In today's terrible suffering, and I mean, and that's also just eternal recurrence, parang history always has these moments, right? So uulit siya, right? Poetry is a place for illumination and enlargement, and hopefully your students can move from wonder to wonderment to wisdom. And that, I guess, is the ultimate goal of teaching. It's not just information and knowledge.
Yeah.
Eventually to wisdom.
Wow. From wonder to wisdom.
Wonder. Nagte-take down notes ako.
Oo nga.
Tsaka parang napapa-moment of silence ako.
Bakit ka nung hinihinga ka ng quotable quote, wala kang mabigay ngayon naman na...
Ay, sabi ko sa'yo, di ba, I cannot preempt my spirit.
Again, Doc Rica, ulitin natin yon. From wonder to
wonderment
to wonderment to wisdom.
Tatlong W. Kasi kailangan ko mag-hello sa aking Wonder Women team. Ito na bang bati period? Hindi pa, sorry.
Hindi pa. So ako, dadagdagan ko lang ang ating conversation, Doc Rica. Parang there is a disposition that is required of the teacher of poetry.
Yes.
Diba?
Yes.
There is a certain attitude or
Correct.
even personality. Yes, even personality,
and
diba?
some knowledge.
Yes,
Yes.
also, diba?
Yes.
To begin with, ikaw rin yung teacher na nagagandahan sa tula,
Correct.
na namamangha sa tula. Kaya you cannot stop saying ang ganda, 'di ba? Pag tinuturo mo. So
Parang yan eh. Go. I'm so sorry. Go.
I'm wondering what advice you can give to our teachers with regards to expanding their appreciation,
The
for
repertoire.
poetry. Oh, and their repertoire, their the repertoire.
Alam mo, this is my
Poetic
nerdiest
appreciation.
advice of all time. And it is my panata. Speaking of diba? Ano yung pagtataya? It is my panata to read as much as I can. To read every day.
Read
And to
talaga.
At saka to read with strategy and intent. Balancing with reading for pleasure and, your own self.
Right.
Or for your own self, no? So I try to read a short story a month, an essay almost every day, a poem almost every day, and I'm always reading a novel. Kasi, in a way, because language is a system, right? The more you know about the system, the easier it is for you to unlock the system.
Yeah.
Diba? So in terms of choosing, you always want to begin with poems you can teach yourself.
Yun.
Tama. Yung hindi ka nahihirapan. Kasi pati ikaw,
Start with the known.
yes. Kasi kung ikaw pati nahihirapan. Yes.
Alam mo naman, ang mga estudyante natin, gusto nila pag medyo tayo pumapalpak, di ba? So, huwag natin sila bigyan ng pagkakataon na medyo tayo pumapalpak, di ba? So, parang always choose a poem you're comfortable teaching, that you're not borrowing someone else's lesson plan kasi it really shows when it doesn't come from your own understanding of a poem, diba? So, so begin with that, and then begin with, I really enjoy memorizing poems. There's really something different.
That's true.
Between reading a poem and memorizing a poem.
And
knowing it by heart. Knowing it by heart, yeah.
Being able to, So, even in poetry class, right, we don't read poems, we recite poems. We recite a poem at least 8 times. Diba? Let a woman read it, let a man read it, let the teacher read it, let's read it together, let's read it one verse at a time, so that you kind of like get the nuance. And sometimes the repetitiveness, parang suddenly you'll see lights go in their eyes, diba? Yung parang ganun pala yung pagka-unlock niya, diba? But it's also not an obsession with unlocking. Sometimes the wonderment and the appreciation is the lesson in and of itself.
Right.
Diba?
Yes.
That they don't have to know everything or understand
Yes.
everything all at once.
Oo, correct. In fact, meron akong tula dito oh. Diba? Which is the quotable quote.
Yes.
Would you like to recite it, Dr.
The world
Santos?
comes to us through language. We know the world through the word. Poetry is not a foreign land, but is everywhere around us, as every word we use is a metaphor.
Yes. Okay. Wow.
Ang
Para akong
ganda, ang ganda. Oo, ang ganda-ganda ng
Thank
ano natin,
you,
discussion
my
natin ngayon.
friend.
Thank you very much,
I hope it
Dr.
was
Rica.
useful to teachers.
Yes,
Ako
I'm
naman,
sure
of
maraming
course.
napapaisip ngayon sa
Yes.
kanilang approaches to teaching poetry.
I
So
hope
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Rica,
having me.
thank you
Pwede na
very
akong
much.
bumate? Di ba?
Yes,
Yes.
pwede. Oo, please.
Siyempre,
Yes,
una
ayan
kong
na,
bumatiin
ayan
si
na.
Marian Gutierrez.
Yes, thank you.
Marian.
Hi,
Marian, perfecto.
Rica remembered you.
And my Wonder Women team, si Ines, Marguerite, tsaka si Frances.
Oh, hello.
Good evening sa inyo.
Alam ko medyo malabo to, no, pero gusto ko talagang bumati sa Marikina City Government.
Why not?
Kasi di ba na-vaccinate ako over the
Oh,
weekend.
congratulations.
Congratulations. Ayan, magpa-vaccinate na. Oo,
Yan ang talagang
congratulations.
pwede lang ako
Yan
mag-stay
ang-
doon at basahan
Oo.
sila ng
Yan ang
tula.
pagtataya.
Araw.
Yeah, yes. Congratulations on your
Congratulations.
bakuna and your and your
And my
episode
tula.
today. Yes, oo. I'm sure busog na naman tayo sa episode na ito. Maraming salamat, Doc Rica, once
Thank
again.
you.
At gusto ko rin batiin ang aking nanay whose birthday it is tomorrow. Happy birthday, Ma!
Happy birthday! Happy birthday! Ay, ako si Antonio sa Wednesday.
Oh, happy
Okay, happy birthday. Ang
Happy
dami
birthday.
nating binabati.
Sorry.
Oo. So,
Tapos na
thank
po.
you very much. This is
Thank
our
you.
episode for tonight. Join us again next week. We'd also like to thank SALT Institute of Ateneo, AHA Foundation, our executive producers, Ms. Rachel Nang and Mr. Jack Nang Jr., and all you teachers for your hard work and dedication during these challenging times. Mag-ingat po tayong lahat. Stay healthy, stay strong. Tomorrow is Tuesday, Math with Teacher Mac and Teacher Rita. Next Monday po ulit, magsasama-sama tayo dito sa Radyo Turo-Guro. Masarap ang usapan. Hapunan ay karunungan.
Okay.
Bye, everyone!
Bye! Good
Thank you,
evening.
Rica.
Keep safe. Bye.
Yes. Bye, Doc.
Tuturo-guro. Tuturo-guro. Abot kayang karunungan para sa mga guro't magulang, usapan at kwentuhan para sa'yo.
The views and comments of the hosts and guests are not necessarily those